This week we are on chapter 2 of Make a Difference, and I hope you had some time to be able to read that chapter. If not, go ahead and stop this video, read the chapter, underline some things, spend some time with it, and then come back and join in the conversation. So this chapter really is about how to find your joy. And we find this joy, this happiness, it is found when we are able to find ways to serve, when we are able to give back, when we are able to make a difference in our community. But a lot of times we get too caught up in the hustle bustle of life. We get caught up from going to appointment to appointment. It starts to become more about us. And we have talked about this several times in church, but you will never be able to fill that God-shaped hole that is inside of you with all of the things. It isn't until we claim our identity in God and then we live out who we were created to be in the world that we begin to feel whole, that we begin to find our happiness. So let me ask you this question. What makes you happy? Where do you find your joy? Where do you find the places that bring you peace, bring you happiness? What are your passions in the world? What are your gifts and talents? There's lots of different ways in which we can shine our light in the world. And a lot of times we get caught up in thinking that we have to do it a certain way. And so right now what I want you to do is just take a minute to write down some of the ways that you are a light in the world, beginning with your own community. How are you a light? How do you shine your gifts out into the world? So go ahead and pause this video, take a few minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll continue. But just write those down. So hopefully you push pause. But if not, please take the time to do this. Your list might have things like I'm open, I love people, I'm caring, I love to be hospitable to people. It might have some of those things in it. It could have a variety of different things, right? And your list might not be complete, but we call these things nudges. God nudges us. God begins to speak into our lives to show us things that make our world a better place through our gifts, the ways in which we can shine a light into our community. So keep this list with you. Keep looking at it. Keep adding to it. Keep thinking about the ways in which you shine your light into your communities and the world. Because when we start to think about and reflect on the ways in which God has given us gifts and shines that light through us, we can be able to then see where God is calling us to give, calling us to be able to do things and serve that will make a difference. Okay, now I want you just to take a minute and to write down just some of the ways that you are staying connected with God through prayer, through Bible reading, through fellowship with other Christians. So go ahead and pause the video again and write those things down, the ways in which you are staying connected to God. Okay, I hope you push pause again and you're back. So these things are really important for us. This chapter was about spiritual discipline, spiritual practices, the ways in which we are connected with God. And this morning in our group that I was leading, we talked about how they really are practices, that sometimes we don't feel like going to church. Sometimes we don't feel like opening up our Bible and reading. Sometimes we don't feel like taking that quiet time. But we go ahead and do it anyway, because when we practice it, when we go ahead and do that practice in our lives, it brings goodness. So we might not always feel like doing it or want to do it, but it's important for us because it lays this foundation. In our book this week, we heard the story of two women who were able to use their passions and gifts to make a difference. If you remember Becca Stevens, she is the one who created that foundation that helped women who had been trafficked, and was able to create a space where they could come in and create soaps and candles and those types of things. But the one story that really stood out for me this week was the one of Margaret Palmer. Margaret Palmer, who saw that ask to go into prison ministries and to just talk with women who were there. And so she stepped out of her comfort zone. She said yes to that. And she began to really relate to these women, to hear their stories. She looked at them as friends. It brought her joy. She found a great space where her joy and the world's needs were meeting. But over the years that she served there, she began to realize that there was a pattern, that when some of these women were able to be released, that they ended up back in there. They ended up relapsing. And she realized that there was no place for them when they got released from jail to have a space where they could transition into a better way of life. And so she had this vision of creating a home where women who were coming out of the jail system could have this temporary place to be able to put into practice and to be able to change their way of life. And her pastor thought, no way are you going to be able to do this. That's a huge vision, a huge dream. But people started showing up because she was faithful, because she kept listening to God's voice leading her into that direction, and was able to open up a home in which she has ministered to so many women and is still a part of it today. One small yes that leads into another yes, that leads into another yes, and pretty soon a big change happens in the community. So we went around this morning and we asked these questions, I had people fill in the blank. That's great for Becca Stevens and Margaret Palmer, but I couldn't do something like that because, what would your answer be? Why can't you do something like that? I heard some answers this morning. One was because I couldn't do something that big, or because I would be afraid of failure, or because I don't have the connections that these women have, or because I like to help on the sidelines, but I don't like to be the person who is leading the cause. What is your I couldn't do something like that because? Next, we talked about how Margaret Palmer and Becca Stevens inspire me to fill in the blank. When I think about these two, they inspire me to say yes in small ways, to be open to the ways in which God is calling me, and to step out on faith and to say yes, to look at the needs of those around me and to say yes to the ways God is calling me to meet those needs. And finally, the last fill in the blank that we did was, I may be no Becca Stevens and Margaret Palmer, but what I can do is blank. What can you do? What are the places that you feel God is calling you to, that maybe you could step out and do something? Something, it might not be huge, but just that next faithful step. Today we talked about in our group a couple of quotes. One from Oscar Romero, who there's a prayer that is based on this, but it says, we plant seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold further promise. This kind of goes back to that lesson that we had last week, where we talked about how we plant the seeds, but we trust that God will do the work. We water the seeds that have already been planted, knowing that they hold further promise, knowing that God will continue to work within those. So it's our job just to do the next faithful thing, to be connected into God and to know how God is calling us. But the quote that really speaks to our lesson this week comes from Frederick Buechner. And he writes, the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. What is that intersection for you? As you think about the ways in which God is placed within you things that bring you deep gladness, the things that make you happy. What is the intersection as you look around your community to where the world's deep hunger might meet? For me, one of the things that I love that just bring me this deep sense of gladness is to sit and to listen to people's stories. To sit and to listen into the ways in which they're living out their life, the experiences that they have, the ways that they're able to see God at work, the ways in which they are hungry for God or they're searching for God. That brings me deep gladness. Somebody else in our class this morning talked about how music, choir brings deep gladness, or community and connection bring deep gladness. What brings you deep gladness? And then I invite you to think about where the world's deep hunger is around you, where there's a need in your community, where you might be able to step in and to use that gift, that unique place, that unique gladness that God has planted inside of you to then be able to help meet the hunger and the needs that are around you. Last thing that we talked about, and this is a really important part of this week's lesson, was staying connected to God, to staying connected into that power source. And we do that through a variety of things, right? Many of us do that through Bible study, through daily reading of the scriptures, of a prayer practice, a devotion time. But others of that we do that in community. We do that by getting together with other groups. We do that by being able to express our faith, talking with other people. Some of us do that through nature, being able to go on walks, to notice how God is at work around us, to appreciate the beautiful birds and the trees and the sunshine. Some of us do that through little acts of meditation. But what are the ways in which you can stay connected to God? Because it gives us two purposes. The first purpose is to be grounded in God, to abide in God's love, to know who we are in Christ, right? So when we are connected to that power source, we are connected into God, and God is able to speak into our lives. That would be the first purpose of staying connected. And the second purpose of these spiritual disciplines is to give us the energy to continue speaking into our lives, to give us that continued guidance that then allows us to be able to do things. One of the faults that we have as humans is that we sometimes stay connected for a little bit, but then we pull that plug. We get busy with our lives and we forget to stay connected. And if we're doing some type of giving piece, if we are volunteering, if we are giving of ourselves and we're not connected, a lot of times we can get tired. We can get really exhausted. We can get irritable with other people. We try to do it on our own power, and we forget that it is God's power that helps us through that. And so I encourage you to think about those warning signs, because we'll all do it. We all slip and we all forget to keep doing those spiritual disciplines that keep us abiding in God's love. And we know that when we are abiding in God's love, there will be fruit. But if we are not abiding in God's love, if we are not connected, there will not be fruit. And it will feel like a drag to us. We will get exhausted. We will be burnt out and tired. So what are those keys for you? The ways in which you can kind of notice the warning signs before you get completely burnt out and exhausted doing it on your own power. What are the warning signs that might help you remember, hey, I need to take a moment and I need to pray. I need to take a moment and remember that God is in control, not me. That God is the one who is blooming these seeds, not me. I am just here to plant or to water. For me, I know that if I get teary, if I begin to get a little teary when I talk to people, I am tired and I need to take a step back. I need to take a little bit of time to rest. I know that when I'm feeling anxious, I haven't spent enough time in prayer or God's word. And I need to be able to pull into that power source of peace to be able to help me. So what are your warning signs? What are the things that might be flags to you to remind you to stay grounded and connected in God's love, to be able to hold on to that power source? Those are some of the things that we talked about in today's session of Make a Difference, this chapter 2. I encourage you to look again at those reflection questions, to spend some time with those, to really think about the ways in which God might be speaking to you through them. Go ahead and write those down. And then also to look at those action ideas. These action ideas are really helpful for you to think about ways in which you might be able to use those spiritual disciplines to help your life, to stay connected and grounded in love. I pray that God will continue to work within you, that you will continue to surrender yourself as you are staying connected to God, and let God speak into your life to help you find out where your greatest gladness lies, and the ways in which God is calling you to shine that light, to take that gladness, and to meet the hungers of the world. We'll see you here next week for chapter 3.